Slipstream and dirty air. Why can following a Formula One car suddenly be really good and then suddenly turn into a nightmare? That's the invisible yet ever-present phenomenon in motorsport, not just in Formula One, to be honest, that we're going to talk about today on Splash and Go. Let's go. The atmosphere, from the Greek atmos meaning air or vapor, and sphaira meaning sphere, so a spherical Earth, otherwise it would be flat atmos, is full of an uncountable number of air molecules that surround us and with which we interact all the time, whether we're walking, running, skydiving, or, for example, in race cars or aircraft. And the phenomenon of interaction between these bodies, any bodies moving through the atmosphere, is called aerodynamics, the dynamics of bodies through the air. And to get started, it's worth mentioning two things. First, I've already talked about everything regarding aerodynamics, or at least everything you need to know about aerodynamics to follow Formula One, in this video here. And this is a glorious re-recording of a video made back in 2021, which at the time got, I don't know, 500 views, when nobody knew about Splash and Go yet, when this still wasn't my job. Since the 1960s, the aerodynamics we just defined have been playing an increasingly important role in Formula One. And a proper understanding of aerodynamics is becoming more and more essential to develop a good race car. In the 90s, we thought we already knew everything. We thought we were at the peak, and in the 2000s, we realized there was still so much we didn't understand. And in 2010, it was the same. 2020, same thing. So, in 2050, today's aerodynamic studies will seem childish. But there are always fundamental lessons that are learned and never forgotten. Why do we always hear that catching a car on the straight is really good, but on the other hand, following it closely through the corners isn't exactly an advantage? Why is it that what works well in one situation, right after, isn't so great anymore? Well, turbulence and slipstream are two sides of the same coin. They're like the Ruth and Rachel of aerodynamics. Here I am, already giving away my age with these extremely dated references. The thing is, the more refined the aerodynamics of a Formula One car are, the more it relies on calm air in front of it so that all its desired aerodynamic properties can work to their fullest. That's why we keep hearing more and more about so-called dirty air. This was a bit off the agenda in the years 2022, 23, and 24. But the greater the aerodynamic understanding of the current set of regulations, which, by the way, we're in the last year of in 2025, the more sophisticated things get, and the more this whole dirty air issue comes up for discussion. Let's look at some concrete examples, so this doesn't just stay in the realm of theory. I've already talked about these basic concepts, as I mentioned in the aerodynamics video, but I'll go over the fundamentals here. You've definitely done the test as a kid where you stick your hand out of the car window and feel a force pushing your hand back, and you notice that when you do this and shape your hand like a blade, that force pushing against you drops a lot. Well, that force holding your hand back is what's called aerodynamic drag. It's a buildup of particles here at the front that pushes your hand back due to the pressure difference. Lots of particles here, fewer particles here, and the atmosphere as a whole tries to correct this anomaly by pushing your hand back. When you lay your hand flat like a blade, you improve its aerodynamic penetration. Fewer particles get stuck at the front, so it cuts through the wind better. I'm not a physics teacher, so I'm not going to explain to you that this force doesn't increase in a linear fashion, and that, therefore, at 100 kilometers per hour, it wouldn't just be double the force pushing your hand back compared to 50. It increases by the square, so it's much greater at 100 than at 50, and it's way more still at 300 than at 100. Okay, but so, what does this have to do with the dirty air from Formula One cars, and why is Slipstream called Slipstream? So, a Formula One car, just like us, interacts with moving air molecules as it passes through them, and at 350 kilometers per hour, you have to agree with me that this is no small force. The car moves through the air molecules, clearing a path, and as it goes by, it leaves behind a trail of scattered molecules. It's not exactly a vacuum, it's not a complete absence of air there, but it's a low-pressure zone that people have come to call a vacuum. Let me give you a very concrete example that I'm sure you've seen before. In a big Brazilian city, an ambulance comes from behind, clearing a path through the traffic. Everyone moves aside, and it goes through. After it passes, there's a gap left between the cars. That would be similar to the so-called vacuum, and it's easier to go through the open space. That's why motorcycle couriers prefer to go through there after the ambulance has cleared the way. And then you might ask me, but doesn't the air come back immediately? It does come back, but not immediately, depending on how hard the race car hit, basically pushing that air far away. And at 350 kilometers per hour, you have to agree with me, that's quite a blast through the air. And then whoever comes behind, just like the motorcycle couriers, faces less resistance to make their way because most of the path has already been cleared by the courier. We're obviously talking about very small differences, and gaining 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5 kilometers per hour on a straight will show up on the stopwatch. It might give you the chance to overtake. Oh, DM, does it really make that much of a difference? Once again, let's turn to concrete examples. Turkish Grand Prix 2010. Mark Webber and Sebastian Vettel, Red Bull drivers, fighting for the lead. Webber led the entire first part of the race, with Vettel right behind him. A track with long straights, lots of flat-out sections. When the race was nearing the end, Vettel, who had been behind the whole time, had more fuel available. Why? Because in the high-speed, flat-out sections, by constantly driving in his teammate Slipstream, he was able to match the same speeds and keep up with his teammate while using a more conservative fuel mode. So, at the end of the race, he had fuel to spare. So, at the end, Vettel used the extra fuel to put the engine in a more aggressive mode, went on the attack, they found each other on the track, and the rest is history. The 2021 Indianapolis 500. Hélio Castroneves secured his 4th victory at the Indiana Superspeedway right there, precisely by knowing how to use the slipstream and getting ready to defend against an overtake, with the gap in the air created by a backmarker ahead. With that, he won the race. The importance of the slipstream in the 500 miles is so great that, during the first 150 laps of the race, there's usually a rotation to see who will lead. And nobody wants to stay out front for too long because that ends up using more fuel and puts you at a disadvantage in terms of strategy. Dirty air has nothing to do with pollution, storms, climate emergencies, and so on. Aerodynamics in Formula 1 is used for 2 things. 1, to reduce drag, as I mentioned before, by reducing the frontal area and improving penetration. And the other is to use the force resulting from the car moving through the air to push it downwards, the so-called downforce. Translating to English, as I mentioned, it's downforce. This downforce helps press the tires onto the asphalt without actually making the car heavier. Because if you actually added real weight, ballast, you'd get side effects from the extra weight, since more weight demands more engine power, which uses more fuel, which needs more cooling, which then requires more braking to stop, and then to accelerate again you need even more engine power. In short, it's a terrible vicious cycle. But downforce adds downward pressure, pressing the car against the asphalt without the downsides of extra weight. With this, with more force than just gravity holding the tires to the asphalt, you can take corners at higher speeds and brake later when stopping. But as I mentioned, for a car's aerodynamics to work well, you need calm air, like an empty swimming pool on a summer afternoon before the kids have jumped in. And turbulent air is something taken very seriously in aviation, so much so that airplanes have to follow mandatory spacing for takeoffs and landings. For example, if an Airbus A380 takes off, a small plane has to wait up to 5 minutes before using the same runway, so it doesn't get caught in the so-called turbulence wake left by the much larger aircraft that just passed through. This disturbance caused by aircraft as they pass by is actually visible, and we have images here to show you. But in the case of a Formula 1 car, you can't just wait 5 minutes before going after another car. In Formula 1, The winner is whoever crosses the finish line first, and to get there first, if you're behind, you need to follow, catch up, or overtake. You can't just wait around for the air to clear up, so this turbulent air, the so-called dirty air, ends up being a problem that later shows up as tire wear. Because if your aerodynamics aren't working properly, your car tends to understeer or oversteer, not behaving at its best, and you end up scrubbing the tires back and forth on the asphalt, destroying the rubber. That's why spending too much time behind someone on a twisty track can be a real issue. If you're stuck in dirty air, your tires start to wear out. When you follow the car ahead through a long radius corner and your aerodynamic efficiency is compromised, you tend to lift off the throttle a bit, and then you also start losing time. But Rodrigo, exactly how much are we talking about here? What's the distance from which the slipstream and dirty air start to affect the performance of a Formula One car? That's going to depend on the speed. On tracks like Monza, the car in front starts to create slipstream and turbulence effects for the car behind from 0 up 4 or 6 seconds, depending on the section. That's why, during qualifying at Monza, it's so important to synchronize the cars perfectly, and teammates work in sync precisely so they can help each other out in turns during Q1, Q2, and Q3, so that whoever was in front in one session is behind in the next, and everyone helps each other out. Just remember the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix this year, when Yuki Tsunoda was synchronized to be ahead of Verstappen on the straight and finish his lap right as Max was starting his, helping his teammate on the straight. He was about 100 to 150 meters ahead, and that was more than enough to give his teammate between a tenth and 80 thousandths of a second, which ended up making the difference. Max got pole that day, but like I told you, it's something that's good on the straights and ends up being a disadvantage in the corners. And on tracks like Suzuka, Silverstone, Barcelona, with long radius, high-speed corners where you spend a lot of time with the steering wheel turned, the turbulence from the car in front affects your car's aerodynamic efficiency. So, something that's good on the straights ends up being a disadvantage in the corners. But DM, is this intentional? Is this done to make things harder for the car behind? No. The turbulence ends up being a side effect of something you pursue to ensure the car's aerodynamic performance. Over time, and the more advanced the aerodynamic refinement became, the more engineers realized that those whirlwinds, those aerodynamic vortices, help and use to help seal the floor and a whole bunch of other things. But the effect of this was to leave a trail of dirty air behind. But no one does this to harm whoever is following, because everyone, at some point, will be behind another car, even if it's a backmarker. So, dirty air and slipstream end up being two sides of the same coin. There's no way to create one without causing the other. After all, at one moment you're on the straight, and the next you're in the corners. The cars end up being the same for both situations. Something that's good on the straights, someone is clearing the way and your engine doesn't have to push as many air molecules ahead, so you reach a higher top speed ends up being bad in the following corner, where you don't have as many molecules to help push against your wings, and the car and tires against the asphalt. Now do you understand the difference? And also the similarities between slipstream and dirty air? That's it! So, that was another episode of Splash and Go on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like, it really helps the channel. Do us this favor. And don't forget to comment here about a bunch of things. Do you remember when I made that original episode? Not many will remember. Did this explanation make sense to you? Do you have any other questions about slipstream and dirty air? Leave your comment down below. If you don't want to comment on any of that, just tell us where you're watching from, drop an emoji. Whatever you like, anything helps the algorithm keep spreading our content across the internet. I always mention we have higher engagement than channels with 10 or 15 times our subscriber count, because every time I ask you to like, comment, or hype up, you actually do it. Why? Because we are the best Formula One and motorsport community in Brazil. Now that I've done my pitch, go ahead and hit that like button. It's ridiculously easy and it's free. So you don't miss anything we do here. We have notification channels, Instagram, Telegram, and WhatsApp, where you can join and get an automatic message every time I post new content here. Last but not least, we have our social media, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, and TikTok, where there's content all the time. The handles are showing up here, and the link is down below in the description. Thanks, and a big hug.